I once heard say something that touched my heart, and it began this way.
Hello, everyone. We hopefully will get a larger audience, but maybe not. If so, we'll just be talking to each other. The group that I'm happy to represent today and to introduce to you are 5 of our current 6 Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship students. They have been working very hard, some for 2 years, some for 1 year, on their research projects, which they will also be presenting this Friday at the regional Mellon Mays Undergraduate Conference, which is going to be held at New York Historical. So they will be quite well prepared, as they are in any way, but hopefully you will enjoy their presentations. The first student up is Mashiat Sultana, who will present on her understandings of the Gothic.
Hi everyone, my name is Mashiat, and my title is The Gothic's Role in Challenging Political and Social Systems Through Literature. So this is my thesis. Literature has always been used as a vessel to convey political and social commentary. The qualities of a Gothic novel, such as the use of suspense, the supernatural, and ominous settings, provide a Gothic fictional tale, and more importantly, provokes larger conversations that critique, challenge, and/or depict existing hegemonic systems that have existed and continue to exist today. So basically, I chose to focus on the Gothic because I just have a very big passion for Gothic novels and also politics, so I just wanted to find ties between the two. So I am focusing on 2 novels so far that I've gone in depth in, which one is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and the other that I'm starting research on is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. And so I'm basically focused on racial and gendered undertones in these novels, and also the question of accountability in Frankenstein and Jane Eyre. So I wanted to apply theory to Frankenstein, so I focused on The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, and her theoretical approach of the carceral state is what I wanted to tie to Frankenstein, and more specifically to the creature in general. So Alexander's theoretical approach around the carceral state, specifically the social construction of otherness leading to dehumanization, encompasses the complexities of resistance, power, and accountability in Frankenstein. Alexander demonstrates the precarious existence of those affected by the carceral state by writing, through a web of laws, regulations, and informal rules, all of which are powerfully reinforced by social stigma, they are confined to the margins of mainstream society. So not only are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people bound by written and unwritten legislation, but the influence of a socially constructed otherness works to sideline those living within the carceral system, which are members of America's undercaste. So I focus a lot about the otherization of specific groups in America and how that ties to the creature's treatment in Frankenstein and how he's repeatedly dehumanized, and also, more importantly, how his bouts of rebellion and resistance are also villainized. Oh, actually, I do want to go back to this. So specifically with the last quote, forgotten are the failed schools, the malign welfare programs, the desolate neighborhoods, the wasted years, only crack is to blame. Alexander talked about basically when crack was used as a tool to dehumanize Black neighborhoods, and how the institutional systems that put these systems in place were ignored by politicians and society in general, while the people were repeatedly dehumanized and villainized, or systems, again, put in place by politicians. And then that I connect to Frankenstein. So Frankenstein is responsible for the circumstances of the creature's existence and fails to take responsibility for the reality of the creature's isolated and tortured life. This quote I included, but I paused when I reflected what the story was that I had to tell, a creature whom I myself had created and ended with life. I resolved to remain silent. The creator, Frankenstein, repeatedly is faced with horrific acts done by the creature, but he always fails to take accountability for his very action that led to the creature's creation, which is exactly like what I wanted to tie with Alexander, because that cyclical nature that institutions and people in power put in place, they always want to deny accountability, and yet they will villainize the very groups that they're harming. I also want to focus on the second quote, tendency to group rebellions and political uprisings with needless crime inherently discredits the agency of those who are directly harmed by police and abuse. My paper really focuses on how protests and revolution and rebellion is so threatening to these people in power, and how it's so threatening that they basically villainize groups who want to take agency and who want to take back what was taken from them. Exactly how, again, Frankenstein repeatedly dehumanizes the creature for what he created, which is a creature who did not ask to be created, and who also, because he is treated so horribly by his creator, feels the need to avenge himself, and that is seen as so monstrous to not only his creator, but also to society in general, and how he's repeatedly otherized in the novel. Last quote I included from Frankenstein: all men hate the wretched, how then must I be hated, who am miserable beyond all living things, yet you, my creator, detest and spurn me. Remember that I am thy creature, I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel, whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. He talks about a biblical reference, and I included this because he's basically confronting his creator and asking why he's so hated when he's the result of a man's pursuit for power and knowledge. I mean, what began the creation was Frankenstein's need for, scientific prowess and needing to make a name for himself. And so that greed and that need for his name to be made led to a life that is repeatedly harmed, and he takes no accountability for it. So I have a little less research on Jane Eyre, but I'm basically talking about the Byronic hero, which is something that is very prevalent in Gothic novels, and specifically in this one, Mr. Rochester is a Byronic hero. And so Byronic heroes are arrogant, intelligent, educated outcasts who somehow balance their cynicism and self-destructive tendencies with mysterious magnetism and attraction, particularly for heroines. And so my paper basically also focuses on Jane Eyre as Mr. Rochester's emotional regulator. And my question is, how can this reflect the emotional dynamics between men and women and in reality? I have a few quotes from the novel that I think really depict this role of Jane Eyre being an emotional regulator really well. The first is, I knew the pleasures of vexing and soothing him by turns. It was one I chiefly delighted in, and a sure instinct always prevented me from going too far. Beyond the verge of provocation I never ventured. And then also, I cannot deny that I grieved for his grief, whatever that was, and would have given much to assuage it. So Jane Eyre is repeatedly responsible for the emotional relationship that she has with Mr. Rochester. And basically in the novel, Mr. Rochester has a really big secret that he keeps from Jane Eyre. I won't spoil it if you haven't read the book. But it's a really, really big secret that keeps her at arm's length. And yet he kind of profits off of or not profits, but he benefits from the emotional and physical labor that she gives him without completely letting her in. And so it leaves her as kind of like very burdened by his grief that she has no idea what it is. And so I talk about hegemonic masculinities. The presence of masculinity is often shaped by feminine roles, girlfriends, mothers, sexual partners. Women bear much of the burden in shaping and holding emotional weight for men in their lives, both professionally and personally. And so I talk about The Managed Heart by Arlie Russell Hochschild. She states, by my estimate, roughly 1/3 of American workers today have jobs that subject them to substantial demands for emotional labor. Moreover, of all women working, roughly 1/2 have jobs that call for emotional labor. Emotional management as economic support. So women are basically responsible and trained and socialized to be emotional regulators for men in both personal and professional relationships. So who is expected to regulate the emotional who is expected to regulate the emotions in an environment and in a conversation. It's usually women, and so I wanted to connect how Jane Eyre's role in Mr. Rochester's life, in him being a Byronic hero, kind of lays the foundation for maybe the role that women have today in their professional lives with men, and also in their personal lives with men. And so my future goals, I want to talk about the role of race and gender in Gothic novels such as Beloved by Toni Morrison and White Sargasso Sea by John Rees, and how the norm and canon can be made complicated by such novels. And I also want to explore more Black, Indigenous, and authors of color in the Gothic genre who continue to redefine the field and use the genre to depict histories and current examples of colonialism and imperialism. So that's also the South Asian Gothic, Haunted Cultures, Histories, and Media. And those are the two books, Beloved and White Sargasso Sea. So I hope to explore more of that. And yeah, those are my references that I've used. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Just an addendum, the regional conference is coming up on Friday. Some students from Columbia, then the other CUNYs, City College, Hunter College, Queens College, Brooklyn College, and Barnard. That's the region. That's the MUF region, New York Regional Conference. I also want to mention that Mashat will be going to Ireland for a class that will specifically include analysis of Gothic novels. Okay, who'd like to come next? Yeah, okay, come on. Next up is Seisha Wesley, who is computer science and sociology, who will be giving a presentation on Viral.
Hi, my name is Seisha Wesley. A little bit about me is I'm a computer science major. And so when I first started the Mellon program, I was kind of figuring out a topic where I can coordinate my studies with my research. And the amazing women in my group that kind of helped me pull together this topic. And we started discussing how there's prejudice and bias implemented in artificial intelligence. And we started having a conversation about how, we weren't being able to be detected by, soap dispensers to hand dryers, some things that other people may not think about if they don't face those problems. And then that led me to uncovering a little bit more. If you were here watching my presentation in the fall, this is very similar. Me and my mentor were kind of reviewing our literature review, and I'll talk about my future with gathering data a little bit later in the presentation. But yeah. So to kind of start off, I just want to give a basic of what is artificial intelligence to people that may not know what it is. It's basically a set of technologies that allow computers to perform human tasks, such as human learning, comprehension, problem solving, decision making, creativity, and etc. A few examples of this is social media, Google Maps, facial recognition, ChatGPT, which I know we all know and love, and self-driving vehicles. So throughout my research, I have kind of accumulated a pros and cons list. So some cons would be the beginning costs, lack of emotion and creativity, degradation, no improvement with experience, reduced jobs for humans, and other ethical problems. Some pros that I found in the articles it eliminates human error and risk, 24/7 availability. It does repetitive jobs, cost reduction, and long-term data analysis. And something that really caught my eye was that it was seen as unbiased and neutral, which is something that I'll be targeting today. So a good amount of people believe that AI is a trustworthy source that can kind of help decrease bias and make these neutral stance decisions. But in reality, it does the exact opposite. So keeping that in mind, my question is, given that machines are reflections of human knowledge and beliefs, how do biases and prejudices implemented in these systems affect specifically Black and Brown people? My methods for my literature review, at least, was reviewing Dr. Joy's book, Unmasking AI, and Rua Benjamin's book, Race After Technology. I also reviewed a few police arrests, which I'll get into later, and my topics that I'll be going over is Google and beauty apps, facial recognition technology, and AI biases on applications and resumes. So to begin, there's a lot of racism reflected in these 3 topics I'll be going over. So to begin with Google, there have been a lot of issues within the past decade where Google has mislabeled African American people, specifically dark-skinned people, as gorillas or monkeys. In Obama's presidency, Google Map actually labeled the N-word hard R as the White House. And a lot of people didn't know about this, but it was a huge thing that was kind of swept under the rug and quickly fixed and was shown to be a glitch in the system, but no one really took accountability for that. You also see a lot of monkey pictures going over Michelle Obama's face during that time period as well. So just another level of Google reproducing stereotypical negative stereotypes towards Black people. Then in 2016, there was a Beauty Eye International Beauty Contest. Many women over the world gave their images to this contest, and then it produced winners. Out of 44 winners, only 6 women were people of color, and there was only 1 woman with dark skin. And this technology was seen as advanced machine learning technology, and it just proved to show that there was a lot of European beauty standard bias within the system. And to kind of finish off on this topic, video games, there was a computer scientist, Dr. Fox Harrell, who was trying to create an African-inspired avatar. Every time he tried to create this character, it was automatically made less intelligent. Again, so all of these topics are just going to show that the software is picking up on biases and stereotypes that humans have created over time. Some people may go and say that these topics are kind of trivial, but these are the same systems that are being reproduced in police software and hiring software that actually have huge impacts on people's lives, which leads me to police faulty facial recognition. So in the past, people have used Artist Sketch to, identify suspects at a crime scene. But now we have phenotyping, which is basically predictive technology that compares images at a crime scene to samples in existing databases in order to predict the appearance of a suspect. Unfortunately, those existing databases lack African American people, so it's more likely to identify the wrong person when it comes to Black individuals. And actually, to prove this, a group of researchers in Georgetown Law, they wanted to see how much of a disproportion there was. So they obtained over 10,000 pages of information from more than 100 police departments to examine facial recognition software and its impacts on communities, and they found that there was a huge disproportion between African Americans versus any other race in the system. And as we know, the Black community already suffers enough with the police system. So all of this data that AI is collecting is just, again, reflecting our biases and systemic structures that negatively impact the Black community. And in Broward County, Florida, there was a study done with recidivism risk scores, which is basically to see the tendency of a convicted criminal to reoffend. The score was completely viable, and it falsely flagged Black defendants as future criminals at twice the rate as white defendants. And again, it was built on already existing forms of racial discrimination and just reinforcing it. Here are just a few victims of wrongful arrests due to faulty facial recognition. 6 out of 7 known cases of wrongful arrests due to faulty facial recognition, all have been, well, 6 of them have been Black. Nigel Parks, Portia Woodruff, Michael Oliver, Randall Reed, Alonzo Sawyer, and Robert Williams. And throughout all of the articles that I have gone through, this isn't a glitch. It actually helps institutions and individuals within these systems to continue to, enforce their own biases and not have to take any accountability. They can just point to technology as the issue, which makes it harder for us to identify who is at fault here. And my last topic is talking about AI with its bias in hiring and anything due to resumes and applications. So in Amazon in 2018, they were trying to test if AI was going to be able to hire a diverse amount of people, and it only ended up hiring men. Again, because AI is based on a training data that we implemented, it saw that men were the key candidates. So whenever resumes were being turned in, it would flag men as the better one. And so people were trying to kind of eliminate this, and they took out any sort of gender, or they're just trying to keep it neutral, and it ended up making the software worse. So they had to scrap the whole project and went back to human recruiters. But then we saw a rise of AI hiring again in 2020 due to COVID. Around like 86% of organizations picked up on AI hiring tools. And their 2 main goals basically were to quicken the hiring process as well as eliminating human bias. And although it did make the process faster, it, again, as I've been saying this whole presentation, just reinforced already existing systemic issues within the structure. So, yeah. So I'm going to end this with the new Jim Code, which is defined by Rua Benjamin. She basically states the employment of new technologies that reflect and reproduce existing inequities, but that are promoted and perceived as more objective or progressive than the discriminatory systems of previous era. So some solutions to this issue. I mean, they're kind of minor solutions because this is such a big problem and technology is growing at such a fast. This keeps going in and out, by the way, this microphone, just so you know. We can invest for more Black and Brown representation in computer science. 60% of people in computer science are white, and actually less than 5% are Black. So we need a more diverse field and a more diverse database, and challenging our language overall. And we also need to teach scientists about their work. There was a few studies done that show that a lot of these people aren't being taught the ethics of computer science. They're just kind of like, well, this is your job. You're going to build these codes, this, that, and the third, but they're not being told how these codes actually affect their own communities. So they lack the awareness and knowledge about this. But yeah, some of my future data that I will be collecting with my professor Granville is basically sending out resumes and sending them out to AI-reviewed hiring systems and getting feedback on who gets a call. So I'll be changing the gender, the race, et cetera, and then doing a quantitative analysis on that. So yeah, that's my presentation. Oh, sorry.
Alrighty. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming today. My name is Julia Fernandez, and I'm a major in the classics. And I'll be giving a presentation to you all on Defecciones, Domination and Defiance, Women's Magical Practices as Resistance in Ancient Rome. A brief overlook of my agenda is that I will present my research question. From there, I'll give a brief history and background on women's magical practices in Rome. I will then explain what a cursed tablet is and how it was used in antiquity, and then give real-life examples found at the Fountain of Annapurna in Rome. And I will wrap up then talking about the future of my research. So my question is as follows. How did women in ancient Rome use magical practices to seek justice and/or exact vengeance, assert agency, and respond to social and legal limitations? My research framework is as women as practitioners of magic in the ancient world use supernatural means to seek justice and retribution in a society where legal and social structures often fail to protect them. By analyzing archaeological evidence, including cursed tablets, in Latin, defecciones, amulets, and other ritual objects, this research explores how women engage with magical practices to assert power and navigate societal constraints. Employing a feminist and womanist interpretive framework, the study investigates the motivations behind women's uses of magic, particularly in moments of personal or social crisis. It considers the extent to which these practices served as tools of resistance, empowerment, and survival within a patriarchal society. The use of magic for vengeance and justice is analyzed in relation to broader social dynamics, including power imbalances and legal inaccessibility, highlighting how magical practices both challenge and reinforce gendered norms. So I'm going to go into the background, which is just giving you my understanding so far of women's magic in ancient Rome. So the slide here contains an image of Ericto, a famous Thessalian witch that appears in many Roman literary works, and the artwork is an interpretation of the stereotype of the ugly witch by John Hamilton Mortimer. So the ugly old Thessalian woman was a common stereotype combining gender, age, and regional otherness to emphasize alterity and suspicion. This stereotype depicted them as dangerous and manipulative, often operating outside of societal norms. Women's magical practices were perceived as threatening because they allowed women to exert power in ways that challenged male-dominated societal norms. For example, love spells could invert typical gender power dynamics by making a man fall uncontrollably in love with a woman. However, in reality, women were more often than not the target of certain magic, particularly love spells and other erotic magic. The overwhelmingly male-driven use of erotic spells suggests that magic was a way for men to assert control over women, especially in contexts where traditional means of persuasion failed. Now I'm just going to give a brief overview of cursed tablets as a technology, what they were, and how they were used. So here we have an image of a cursed tablet, which was actually found at the Fountain of Annapurna, and I'll go over it in detail a little bit more later on. So a cursed tablet is a small sheet of lead or sometimes other metal inscribed with a written curse intended to bring harm, control, or misfortune to another person. These were commonly used in the Greco-Roman world from the 5th century BCE through late antiquity. Some key features of cursed tablets are the material, typically being made of lead because it was cheap, easy to inscribe, and symbolically connected to the underworld. The format, meaning that they were often thin sheets, folded or rolled, sometimes pierced with nails, or placed in containers with ritual items, hair, wax figurines, etc. They were often written in Greek, Latin, or a magical nonsense script to heighten mystical power. And the placement of cursed tablets was important as they were often deposited in graves, wells, sanctuaries, or near the target's location, places believed to connect to chthonic deities or spirits. In this case, this particular cursed tablet was folded and rolled up before being inserted into an oil lamp and left at the Fountain of Annapurna. So now we'll get into the fountain. So we find ourselves in the city of Rome. The fountain was said to have been constructed around the 4th century BCE and was reported to have been used all the way up until the 6th century CE, the Common Era. Many, many years later, in 1999, the fountain was discovered and excavated near Piazza Euclide in Rome. Here again, we see our original cursed tablet example with an outline of what was inscribed on it. This tablet is the Curse of Cassianus. It features a depiction of a demon with straight hair, bird-like claws on its left arm with faint traces of a hand, and feet pointing outward. The demon's drawing is crude, but the figure can potentially be identified as Abraxas, who, in Gnostic traditions, is a powerful supreme being and the embodiment of destruction. Inscription A, which is above the head, is unreadable and possibly Greek or Latin letters. Inscription B, to the right of the body, are Greek letters arranged in a quadrangle but without any apparent magical system. But inscription C below reads in Latin, Cassianusquem ponere poterat, qui illas mala mulieres surubserunt pauperem. This can be interpreted as a curse against a man named Cassianus, who had hired some witches, evil women, literally translated, to rob his victim, who ultimately identifies himself as a poor man. So Cassianus self-identifies as a poor man. Though there's no way to guarantee who made this tablet, one possible interpretation is that the witches he hired could have been snubbed by him in some way, possibly withholding payment since he self-identified as poor, and in return they cursed him for not paying them. So the future of my research. My research will continue to focus on the concepts of women's justice and vengeance within the ancient Greco-Roman world. I hope to be able to explore these themes from an archaeological perspective using material culture beyond cursed tablets such as amulets. I also hope to explore indigeneity in the Roman world. We mostly have words to describe these goddesses and syncretize them with the Greek and Roman pantheons, but both cults have deeper indigenous roots, so how do we make meaning of that? In addition, I hope to explore the syncretization of magic and indigenous practices with religion. We've seen examples of this in Yoruba and Lukumi traditions, where orishas were syncretized with Catholic saints so that these practitioners could practice safely in a Catholic world. And so my question that I hope to explore is that, are we seeing this in the ancient world, and how can we even know that? So.
Can y'all hear me okay? Yes. Okay. My name's Naya. I'm going to be looking at how Afro-pessimism fits into Black radicalism and the efforts towards Black liberation and decolonization through Black art. My advisor's in the room with us. Everybody clap for Kamani Gibson. Yay. I was interested in this because I feel like a lot of the conversations that we have around Black liberation and radical action is about rioting, protesting, and like the physical action. But because of that, a lot of the conversation about the self, like the individuals that are doing these things, get left out. So I really wanted to take a moment to actually like consider how Black ontology fits into all of this. Ontology meaning, you know, Black existence in the literal aspect, the spiritual, social, and, you know, community aspect. And we can understand my topic in pretty much 3 sections. So I'm going to go over some key concepts for you, but the major 3 chunks that we're going to break everything up into is going to be Afro-pessimism, into Afro-surrealism, and then Afrofuturism. And these little things are basically just little phrases you can use to easily remember what each means, or at least the point I'm trying to make with each of them. So for my definitions, I have a big little master list for you guys to look over, but the most important things to think about are going to be Afro-pessimism, Afro-surrealism, and Afrofuturism. And Afro-pessimism really is like a framework to understand things from. So, and even though it has the word pessimism, it's not exactly about feelings. It's more about the perspective of Black people in America. And what it deals with is this idea that because of slavery, because of this, you know, genocidal act that's happened to Black people, that we've kind of been crystallized in this state of not being able to be anything beyond the oppression that we've experienced, where the Black body is always going to be a colonized subject, and there's not much opportunity, at least in the American context, that it talks about to really progress from that. And what I'm trying to do in this presentation and in my work is pretty much push against that idea. And I would like to argue that the way to do that is through Black art because of how it's rooted in folk tradition, expression of the self, and it gives Black people the ability to imagine a world beyond colonization as well as their Black future in their terms. And something really important to think about when we're talking about Afro-pessimism is this idea of social death, which is why it becomes so visceral for the Black body in everyday life. Social death pretty much says that you don't exist anymore, which when we're talking about colonization, that says that the Black body is not human. They don't have a culture. They aren't able to be, productive or contributors of society. That's pretty much what social death reinforces this idea that they're not worthy of being regarded. You become invisible. Now, the reason why I chose to look at Black art is because of how it really centers the Black experience, not just in the Black past, but it talks about how Black people move through the world, how they understand themselves, and we see that Black art isn't just art for the sake of art. It becomes something that's always distinctly tied to a political movement at the same time. So, for example, when the Black arts movement first, started taking off, it was happening alongside the Black Power movement. And even though these things were they had different aims, they pretty much had the same goal, which was talking about liberation. Black art ends up being something that's always spiritually rooted in Black ontology. It's talking about Black life, Black existence, what it means to be Black in any given space. So cultivating the Black aesthetic becomes really important, especially thinking about folk art. W.E.B. Du Bois argued that folk art is necessary to cultivating what we would consider as Black art. And I believe that this is important because when Frantz Fanon talks about developing a national culture in Wretched of the Earth, he takes the time to really discuss the role of art, music, poetry, all of these things that have nothing to do with actual direct action of decolonization. But he, argues that he says that decolonization is truly the creation of a new man. And I think that art is where we're able to see that happen. The ability to reconstitute what Blackness means in that context. Black people are able to redefine themselves in the world. So this takes me to Afro-pessimism. And during the Obama presidency, during both of his presidencies, there was a rise of slave movies or movies dealing with African American and African slavery, which becomes something really interesting to consider because at the time the social sphere pretty much they're arguing that we've beat racism. We have a Black man in office, Black people can do anything, we've made it. Liberalism really starts to take roots, and there's this idea that the work is done. But instead, Hollywood turns out there's this uptick in production of movies depicting Black people in the same ideology that Afro-pessimism pretty much says is what's inevitable, that the Black body is always going to exist in this image, that they're not able to exist in all of these other ways. So it's in this way that we see the Afro-pessimism really it really becomes a critical framework for analyzing and interpreting the world around us. I'm not saying that movies about slavery are not important. They are, but also there's so much to the Black existence outside of that state, especially in a time where somebody who is Black gets to be in the United States office. And instead, what it ends up doing is reinforcing this idea of Black exceptionalism, where only certain kinds of Black people are able to be successful, while the general population of Blackness, this is what Blackness is for the public. But every now and then, we have somebody that's able to be successful, and then what it is to be Black and successful becomes up for discussion. So Afro-pessimism long story short, Afro-pessimism is a critical framework for starting discourse, but I think that is something risky because if it doesn't allow you to imagine a future because of how definite it is, then there's no possibility of real progress. Which takes me to Afro-surrealism. And we're seeing like Afro-surrealism have a big moment right now. And it's really important, it's really interesting because of how it uses the absurd to explain the Black experience. It talks about how, forgive me, y'all. It talks about how the Black experience in the past and the future are pretty much something that's it's always happening at the same time. They're constantly in conversation with each other. But it allows artists to imagine Blackness in terms that have not been conceived before. It doesn't have to adhere to reality. It doesn't have to adhere to real social constructions. But at the same time, what it does is it takes Blackness out of the context of coloniality and white supremacy. And oftentimes it flips it, especially in these films where we have the world building aspect. It flips Blackness on, or flips racism on its head, because instead of the Black body being something that's strange in white space, oftentimes it's the world around the character that's strange, and the Black body is what's normal, and they end up being the hero. In a lot of films where this is the case, in TV, the person that you would typically, assume is no good, or maybe not going to be the protagonist that's not, in standard terms, a hero. Your American hero ends up becoming the hero in this context. In Get Out, for example, he's a man who finds himself in this situation, and he does really awful things to get himself out of the situation. But the whole time you're trying to root for him, he ends up, again, no spoiler, but he ends up killing all the people who kidnapped him, which is an atrocious thing. But that's what success is in this context because of the Afro-surrealist world. So what it does is it really allows Black people to imagine different versions of Blackness. Our video is not going to play today, but part of this is considering of the Black body in public space, not just in film, but especially the performance aspect when we're thinking about artistry. And I would like for us just to consider, Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl performance this past year in relation to Beyonce's her Christmas Day halftime performance, where a lot of the same imagery of Americana is being used, but because of the Black bodies and how the choreography, all of the aesthetics are being positioned, the messaging becomes extremely different. On top of this, which is something I would like to delve into later on, is the colorism aspect. Beyonce is a lighter-skinned Black woman, so there's that to consider compared to Kendrick Lamar, who's very LA Compton, and the positioning of these Black bodies in contrast to Americana ends up sending different messaging. And these things become important because of how they affect the social sphere, not just the visual aspect. So with that, I would like to talk about the radical Black future, which is what I'm arguing for. This idea that what colonialism does is it strips the colonized subject from being able to imagine a future of freedom. Imagination becomes a tool of oppression in that way, because it says that only the people that are supreme, only the oppressor is able to have a future. And that takes me to all these works that at their time are not considered Afrofuturist in any way, but they really are in essence Afrofuturist because of how the artists themselves are using their reality to imagine a Black future where there's freedom, happiness, liberation, even if it's not in clear terms. I want to talk about this painting in specific, the Sugar Shack, which is featured in Ryan Coogler's Sinners. But this being a cultural, you go anywhere and a Black person's going to recognize this painting, even if they don't know what the name of it is. It's a cultural artifact at this point, and it becomes so important because it's one of the markers in what is regarded as Black romanticism. It says that the Black body is able to be free, move, in a way that is it's beautiful. So, talking about things like that, all of these works that really contribute to this idea of living archives, and part of the reason why I'm arguing for Afrofuturism is to really uphold the idea of living archives. Black artists in our modern day should be supported, and we should think about their contributions as something that's speaking to archival work, even if we're not able to understand at that time what the significance is. Oftentimes, because there's talking about the reality of being Black in that specific time or place, they end up being something that we can look back on as archival and reflective of the Black experience. Specifically, Elizabeth Catlett, who just she passed, but they ran a show of all of her work at Brooklyn Museum, and a lot of the work, even though she wasn't respected really at the time, which was during the Harlem Renaissance, along with her male counterparts, a lot of her work was very depictive of Black women specifically, who she felt was not considered or talked about, and the Mexican liberation, Mexican Civil War. And that's all I'm gonna have for right now, because I'm getting nervous about time. Thank you.
I'm not gonna use the microphone. I have to? Oh, my fault. Okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Just want to say, my other fellows, they did so good. I actually really loved all of yours, because I have poor memory, which is related to this presentation. And I always forget, what is there about? But then whenever I'm reminded, it's really great. So I just want to say that. But yeah, so my research goes into dementia risk in Latin women of color. And you're probably thinking, Latin women of color, is that two separate things? No, it's not. The Latin world is very diverse. There's white Hispanics, Afro-Latinos, indigenous, mestizos, just very mixed, the Latin world. So I'm specifically focusing on Latin women of color, and more just the Black and brown people, individuals who identify as female with indigenous, African and or mixed race descent. So this is my research question. What are culturally relevant strategies in preventing cognitive decline among unpaid caregiving Latin women of color? So I'm also focusing on unpaid caregiving, Latin women of color, the caregivers, because many Latin women take on this role of being the caregivers for their family. They have to not only bring in money, especially in the modern world, but they also have to provide for their families. And oftentimes they end up taking care of either younger siblings, as in my case, or for my mother's case, taking care of their relatives dealing with an illness. Which this research is pretty personal to me, because my mom and my grandmother, they're both caretakers for my grandfather with dementia, specifically vascular dementia. And growing up, he played a really big role in my life, helped take care of me. And now I'm kind of on the opposite spectrum, where I'm taking care of my younger brother. So it's really two big worlds colliding. I think that's really fascinating. I had really good transitions. It was so pretty the way the things were gonna pop up. But I just wanted to say, quickly go on to what exactly I mean by culturally relevant strategies. So what I mean by that is basically are there any present strategies or tools, resources that maybe we can come up with to help tackle structural inequalities, systemic barriers, and cultural expectations of Latin women of color? Maybe through social support, community within culture, and as well as progressive scientific research on prevention and simple brain exercises like Sudoku. So we can tackle this is through health education, outreach, policy reforms, and community. So with health education, there's not really one issue I had when trying to figure out, like, oh, are there present day strategies? And there is, but there isn't at the same time. The issue that I fell under was that how do people reach, like, predominantly people of, how do I say this? Predominant color neighborhoods of color. And it's really like a hard thing. Like I noticed that, like, for example, like with gentrification, that's one. Like, how can we, in New York specifically, most new things like parks, libraries, they're not meant for the people living in the neighborhood, the locals. They're meant for new incomers, transplants, gentrifiers. So, like, my whole thing is how can there be like an outreach, and if there's any policy reforms that we can implement. And a big thing is community, especially in the Latin household. I grew up always putting my family first, and community is a very big thing. But we also growing up in a very Latin and Asian household, we're very stubborn and we don't like to ask for help. And I feel like that's just like a cultural thing. And I wonder if it's possible to kind of like break down that like stubborn, I guess, barrier that the Latin world holds, and to just allow help from the outside. So I'll just quickly go over this. This is the background. So some structural inequalities that Latin women of color face are like the historical and social expectations of familial caregiving, as well as any or most like Latin families deal with is economic and healthcare barriers. And I have some facts in the next slide. And so for cultural and social pressures is like the healthcare disparities, I'll look once more, and then policy and institutional neglect. Okay, so here are my facts. So in 2023, 17.9% of Hispanic Americans were uninsured. 1/3 of Hispanic Americans report experiences in discrimination when seeking healthcare. 6 in 10 Hispanic Americans believe a great loss of memory or cognitive abilities is normal in aging. So that kind of ties back to like the whole educational thing. Like a lot of people just lack the knowledge of health and what is normal and what's not normal, and what you should be seeking out and not waiting like years, months to go to the doctor for. And then lastly, 1.5 Latin Americans are 1.5 times more likely to suffer from dementia than white Americans. So most of this data was provided by the Association of Alzheimer's. They have, which is really cool, they have like different I guess like tabs to go through. They have tabs on for just dementia overall, then for specifically Latin Americans facing with dementia, African Americans, and then indigenous. And I thought that was really insightful. So how does chronic stress and caregiving play a role in, I guess, the susceptibility of cognitive decline? So I go into Dr. Arlene Geronimus's weathering hypothesis. So let me pull that up. Darn, I don't have it here. It's okay. So the weathering hypothesis basically goes into allostatic load, which is the constant wear and tear of stress, different burdens of daily tasks, and just overall life. But it's a little bit more than that. Her initial research showed that and her research is primarily on African Americans. However, later in her research, she does go on to say that she broadened it into more just like Black and brown people of America. But yeah, so like this wear and tear increases the susceptibility of like chronic illnesses. and there is scientific data to back this up, but I won't go too much into it. So yeah, chronic stress can impact cognitive and physical health. There's, like I said, increased allostatic load and neuroinflammation, which since I am focusing on cognitive decline, as well as accelerated aging and cognitive decline. I guess I'll touch on it just a tad bit. So there's these things called telomeres at the end of our DNA strands. And basically telomeres indicate the biological age of a person. So from her research and her studies, it was noted that white Americans had longer telomeres, which is a good sign. They have a younger biological age, while African Americans had a shorter telomeres, indicating they had a what's it called? Oh my God, what's the word? Oh my God, what's the word? No, not shorter. Like, what's to be younger? No, older. older. They had an older biological age, despite being the same age, and that just shows. And then her research further goes on into, like, it's not because they face different disparities, but it's actually just because living in a world, specifically in the Americas, that prefers white Americans over black and brown individuals. That is why this is happening. That's why weathering occurs, which I find really fascinating, and it was crazy. These are my references. Thank you. So it's like it's two internships, and the first internship is for a newsletter where I'll be kind of discussing different preventative exercises or just different tools that people from underrepresented groups can follow. They can read through that. It's through this doctor. And then the second internship is under the Bridge program, which I'll be working alongside dementia patients, which I'm really excited about, and as well as doing some clinical work, and yeah, just working alongside those doctors as well and those researchers.